Hey, Steelers Nation, it's Joe Rocky with the Pittsburgh Steelers Syndicate. And in today's episode, I'm going to be breaking down the wide receiving room, specifically Robinson. There has been so much buzz out there about how Robinson is being penciled in as the slot receiver and how he could be this great upgrade for the unit. And this episode, I'm going to break down not only why I completely disagree with that narrative, but why at the end of the day, if Robinson is one of the 45 getting a hat on game day, the Steelers do not have their best receiving room on the field. So let's start with this. Robinson, obviously, as we talked about, as he's come to the team, is coming off 2 horrendous years with the Rams. The Steelers paid essentially nothing to get him. And as we look at this, do we think he's going to come back? Well, he's right in line with the rest of the offseason moves, particularly the free agent acquisitions, where Khan has said, we don't care about recent injury history. We just want to see what you can give us. And now we're in a question of, does Allen Robinson have anything left? And historically speaking, it's very hard for receivers to recover from 2 down years. And as people are drawing up all this greatness of having Allen Robinson come back, Allen Robinson this, Allen Robinson that, I really think it's greatly missing the boat of how the Steelers construct their wide receiver room when it comes to both the 53-man roster and to the 45-man game day roster. So we know without a doubt Johnson and Pickens are 2 on the field. Historically, they only dress 4 plus a return man. Sometimes it's 4 counting the return man. So for the sake of discussion, let's say that it's either going to be Calvin Austin as your return man or Olszewski. Personally, super rooting for Calvin Austin to win that battle and for Olszewski to be a non-Steeler, to say the least. So if we go with that assumption that Calvin Austin is now one of the players who are getting a hat for special teams purposes, we know that Miles Boykins is going to be the special teams captain. With Derek Watt not on the roster, Boykins is set up for that role to be on every special teams unit with the exception of maybe field goal block. And with that being said, he then is going to be getting a hat. Okay, now we're down to 1 or 2 left. And then that comes down to, does Anthony Miller beat out Robinson? And by all accounts, it's essentially a chicken and an egg question because both of them didn't play well last year. I guess should be more specifically said. Miller didn't play at all, but when he was in camp, he sparkled. So do we get into a spot where on game day, we want Miller to have a hat or Robinson? This is where we can have different conversations about body type on the field because we obviously know Pickens, big dude. Boykin, big dude, both tall. Calvin Austin and Johnson, short and shifty. Robinson is closer to the big guy department, and Miller is one of the shorter ones. So then it just becomes a personal bias about what do you want to have on the field. And this might come down to who are the Steelers more comfortable essentially having pulled off the field and because they're in a slump in the season. Which to me then comes down to who do you believe is more likely to have a slump during the season? George Pickens or Deontay Johnson? And it's a very interesting question when you look at it from that perspective. Because Deontay had a down year last year. His volume and his volume remained the same, but his production with it fell through the floor. Fell through the floor for a lot of reasons, one of which is teams have recognized that Deontay Johnson is a hole sitter. He finds the hole, he sits in it regardless of where the hole is on the field, and he does not push it. He just sits it, takes the easy catch, and doesn't really give you anything after the catch. that's his game. That's what he does. It's part of why people say he's always open, because he's sitting in a hole. Well, he's also sitting in a hole that's short of the stick, so the defense doesn't care about it. Deontay Johnson has one of the worst ratios of getting the ball on third down and converting it into a first down. It's one of the worst ratios of that overall in the league, but especially on third down. So I can make a very strong argument that we want to see less of that. Likewise, Pickens does not have a very good ratio of balls thrown in his direction to them becoming completed passes. See, Johnson at least is giving you some yardage. He's just not really doing much after he has the ball. Pickens is the opposite. When he is getting the ball, it's a chunk. He catches the ball further downfield. He's just there at his depth of target. But B, he gives you much more after the catch. So when we look at this in great totality, it can become a very interesting question. Do I want to just have no yardage downfield and an incomplete pass? Or do I want to have short of the sticks? Basically, we're not getting a first down either way. That's how you look at it. And this conversation is why Steelers have a negative national pressure here, Steelers Nation. I get that it's not a happy thought process, but it's also true. This is why we look and say, would Allen Robinson make a difference in this equation? Well, Allen Robinson is, if he's playing, he's probably going to have to be the slot. But Johnson, despite everything I just said about him, is probably the best slot on this roster because he's the safety blanket that's open in a hole. Most teams have that as the tight end because he's an athletic freak and you just put it to him in an easier pass over the middle because that's where they start, which on this team would be perfectly sense, except for the fact Freiermuth is one of the more vertical and penetrating tight ends in the NFL. So when we look at what Muth can give us downfield, does it make sense to have another guy clogging upright? That's what we tried to do with Claypool last year, but it didn't work well at all. Or do we want to say have Austin or Miller push around the outside slot sometimes? Obviously motion comes into play here, and let their athleticism be something that's more difficult to cover. So when I look at this in totality, looking at everything we just discussed, I believe that the difference when we're looking at big guys getting a hat between Robinson being on the roster compared to what Boykins is giving you is not greater than what putting Miller on the roster would give you. And that's why I ultimately would want that. I like the concept of being able to go out into a set where you were able to have Miller, Austin, Johnson, and then either Freiermuth or Pickens. Because we know not every receiver is out there every play. But if you had those three with Najee in the backfield, your safeties have to back up by default. And giving the over-the-top vertical passing threat that Miller can give you in a way that Robinson cannot, with Austin out there as well, opens up the field. Imagine you ran a set of three receivers to the left side of the line of scrimmage, with Johnson and Miller being the inside one and Austin being on the far outside. You're already going to have to cheat the defense towards that left side of the field. We know we're better running the ball to the right, and there's going to be emphasis to the left. It's just an easy way to set up dynamic situations to make the running game better. Now, does that mean that Allen Robinson is a better receiver than Miller? I think it's a push. Do I think either of them are going to give you world-changing numbers? Not on this team. Because regardless of what lineup you construct, with Miller or Robinson out there, they are at best the fourth pass receiver on the field. They're not going to surpass Pickens. They're not going to surpass Johnson. And they're not going to surpass Freiermuth. So in some regards, they are just a decoy. And I want to have a decoy out there that's scarier. End of story. And with Robinson, we don't get that out of his game anymore. Miller does give that to you. Austin obviously gives that to you. So when I look at this in totality, I think there's going to be a lot of games this year when the Steelers only dress 4 receivers, with Calvin Austin being the return guy and a receiver getting dual responsibilities. And when we look at that, that frees up extra hats for your secondary, having a 4th tight end on the roster, which is something that it looks like they're going to want to do a lot. And in doing so, it comes down, as I said, to Robinson and Miller. Both will be on the 53-man roster, but I do believe when push comes to shove, trying to build Allen Robinson into the great under the radar, going to make a huge impact on this team, I don't think is realistic and or good. Because I think he's going to give you very similar production to what Boykins did last year, except for the fact that Boykins is a better special teams player because Robinson doesn't do him at all. So those are your four receivers who get hats, plus your return man in Austin. So it'll be Johnson, Pickens, Boykins, Miller, and Austin. And then you have Robinson essentially as if one of those guys get hurt, he can step in. Sure. But if Boykins gets hurt, Robinson can't do the special teams element of it. And I think that's really where we get into game day situations when we look at how this would play out. Because there is a possibility you're not dressing all 4 tight ends every game. And then it goes, okay, one of those guys can step in, probably Connor, and be all the special teams duties. It's a very interesting problem that the Steelers are going to have when we dive into the game day hats compared to the 53-man roster. And this is the type of question that overall I think a lot of writers and reporters are missing, because obviously Robinson's on the 53. They would take either Olszewski to make the team or Miller or Austin to completely fall apart for Robinson not to make the team. So Robinson's on the 53-man roster. If for no other doubt, he's going to beat out Olszewski, and Austin will beat him out as well. So all this to say, we need to pump the brakes on Allen Robinson. He was a nice addition. It's going to make a very good camp battle for the wide receiver spot. But as I sit here right now, I believe that those snaps are going to ultimately go to either Miller or Austin when it's all said and done.